All right then. In my opening remarks, I wanted to deal with the original idea for the summit, how we got to sexual rights as a theme. Interestingly, it came from a discussion I was having all winter with a colleague in Melbourne. And it seems there that the state of Victoria is in the midst of considering a major shift in its health policy that will embrace sexual rights as its guiding framework. We've always been really impressed with Australia and their work with HIV has been absolutely enviable. There, as you may know, the HIV epidemic is about 91% gay men. So it's a different sort of situation in Australia, and gay men have done a lot to lead the way. But even so, Australia, if you've been there, seems almost an unlikely place to launch sexual rights into public health. But obviously there's a tribe of savvy gay thinkers behind all of this that work in Melbourne. And today, what I'd like to do is retrace the steps that took us here, steps that come from movements in our own thinking that have happened at this summit. So going back a couple of years to 2009, after years of tracking rising HIV infections amongst gay men in the Sex Now survey, and trying but failing to point out the extent of the problem and the lack of attention to it, we recognize that health determinants not in our control must be playing a critical role in sustaining epidemic conditions. We wondered then if sexual orientation was an unrecognized health determinant, but we soon learned that we have few data to indicate the role of sexual orientation in population health. Indeed, we learned that we have a profound lack of data on gay men in general. In any case, our growing knowledge of how social determinants work suggested that there had to be more than sexual orientation behind gay men's apparent inequities. And then considering intersectionality in gay health challenged our categorical thinking, a kind of thinking that's pervaded the entire field of HIV. And one such category is MSM, the way all men in public health have been categorized as men having sex with men, ignoring the agency of gay men as a different group, those that self-identify. Emerging data from Sex Now 2010, our first national survey of 8,000 men seeking men on the internet, showed that there were substantial social and economic status differences between gay men and men partnered or married with women. That data suggested that gender status in the hierarchy of masculinity was playing a critical role in determining health outcomes. We have to agree with the critics of gay health that the cure for inequity lies beyond the scope of health action by itself. Somehow we have to change society, not especially gay men, to improve gay health. To move upstream from health problems like HIV, gay bullying, and suicide, we have to do more than offer health services. If gay health is so determined by gender status and sexual hierarchy, we need social change on a grand scale to bring gay health into being. We need to work on social justice to achieve health ends, and so the two are kind of in a tension. Which brings us to sexual rights. And sexual rights is seen as the latest addition to the greater discussion of universal human rights that's been going on for decades. But sexual rights is seen as the new kid on the block. I've seen that in quotes so many times. And here are a few highlights of related ideas in sexual rights that are contributing to the definition of sexual rights on the WHO website. But once there, you begin to see the problems immediately. We're tarnished by the same omissions and limitations as human rights to begin with, and then a flood of other issues, like the assumption of ethical participation in sexuality, or the enforcement of rights of the victimized. Where does all this end? When we brought the topic of sexual rights to a gay health reading group that we have recently held at the CBRC, a few poignant remarks remained with me. One contributor found the topic depressing because it's so evident that we'll never get there. And another asked, is Canada even a rights-based society? Laws exist, but nothing changes. Another suggested that there were so many weaknesses with human rights, what could we really expect from sexual rights? We have to really see ourselves in comparison with some other society, with some other country, to actually recognize our relative circumstance, how far we've actually come. Take the current film that's showing right now at the Fifth Avenue Theatre in town, called Circumstance, about lesbian love in Iran, for example. We may not have morality police in Canada, but vice squads are not far behind us, as we know. We're reminded of where sexual rights remain with Jamie Hubley's recent and very public suicide, and that tells us somewhere about where we actually are with sexual rights in Canada. So we're in a hotly contested territory. But I wonder if rights are what we're really after. We do need sexual rights as a way to kind of conceptualize where we're going, mentally frame something else, like an end state, the way life will be when sexual rights are actually taken seriously. Our Australian colleagues have suggested that the goal is a society that accepts equity of social expression. Think about it, equity of sexual expression. How do we get there? That seems some kind of an answer to our Canadian paradox, where we have laws but institutional neglect at the same time. Equity of sexual expression has to be practiced amongst people because it's the right thing to do, not just an enforced right. The function of sexual rights is really about how it focuses our thinking, about how to achieve the greater goal of equity of sexual expression. Indeed, we may even achieve de facto sexual rights in some places if we work on equity of sexual expression in institutions where it matters, like schools and health environments. And we've already had a paper in this summit on how equity of sexual expression is being achieved in the Canadian military. Think about it, the Canadian military is actually ahead of some of our other institutions. As key thinkers have noted, we can never get far away from politics in this business, and some of what we're going through at the moment is truly oppressive, but the fact is that enormous change is upon us. Millions and millions are experimenting with their lives in ways that no one would have been able to think about in the 1950s. Nonetheless, we still have the workplace, our careers, where so many of us contend with the real politics of life without equity of sexual expression. So we have to live with Derrida's paradox as we engage sexual rights. Sexual rights may well be a flawed agenda, insufficient for the real state on the planet, but an indispensable marker of progress all the same. We're going to hear many papers at this summit that will converge with these ideas, contribute data, and provoke our taken for granted thinking. Welcome again to the summit. And Just a little plug for the survey where this year are exploring sexual rights, and sexual expression in the summit, or rather in the survey. We've done a really intense job on this survey, and hope that you'll help us get the participation rolling. So without further ado, we should get on with the summit now, and I'd like to introduce Dr. Marina Moreau, who's going to introduce our guest speaker.